I see you bobbing your head to the music of
Good morning, good morning, good
the
morning.
intro. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, that intro. That's kind of why I like it. The music, it's got a little. It has a good feel to it. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good Friday to you, Constitution vet.
Good morning to you, sir.
It's the end of the end of the world as we know it. Right. That's our topic. Civilization collapse.
And I feel fine.
And I feel fine. Yes, civilizations come and go, and they rise and they fall. But, well, I don't want to steal your thunder, Ben. I'm gonna let you lead off. What are we talking about? What specifically, or is this just a general? Let's talk.
Well, the big topic for today is focusing on what causes society to collapse. And then we're going to go from the big picture to the small picture and focus on your home, California.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to start with this little quote here. I know you've heard this quote before. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. Weak men create hard times. Sadly, we are in a time when the weak men are creating very hard times. And I got this idea when I watched the video recently by Dr. Steve Turley, and he focused on why California is collapsing. And so, since I don't live there, I want to really give you a platform for this because I know you have a lot more experience in there than I do. All I'm seeing is the articles, the data, and the reporting from independent journalists, but I'm not there, right? So I can assume all day long why it's collapsing, why so many people are leaving every single year. But I want to get your perspective. Why do you think the society in California has been and apparently is collapsing?
Foreign investment.
Oh, okay.
I mean, bottom line is there are enemies of our country that also want to get rich.
Mm-hmm.
So they like two birds with one stone. Invest in California, real estate, intellectual property, Hollywood, like your biggest films. So China has this huge, huge film industry.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you a brief story. This was about probably 6 years ago now. I'm close friends with an A-list Hollywood producer who has does big movies, A-list stars in his movies. And one day I was in his Beverly Hills office. It's just kind of surreal that I'm personal friends with this guy. My wife is close friends with his wife. I mean, that's how we became friends. Our kids are all the same ages. I have a junior and a sophomore at the high school, and he has a freshman in the same school. And so I was in his office, and this is before, I even started any of my YouTube channels or anything like that.
Yeah.
And he's showing me in one of the rooms, it has all the projects. This one's about to hit theaters, and this one will hit theaters next summer. And these are in development, right? It's just got this, it's got the faces of the big A-list stars in them, etc. And he said to me, right now, China is where Hollywood was when we replaced the BBC, right? Because before there was a Hollywood, British entertainment, like the Brits were the heart of pop culture. Why do you think all those, those bands and, all your favorite rock bands are a bunch of British, like they had a very prosperous art scene in the UK, and then Hollywood came and took over. Right. Basically, Hollywood. And so that was a point in history. It was a paradigm shift from where media, the heart of media was in England, and then it moved over to the west coast of the United States of America and Hollywood. Well, China is now in that position where Hollywood is now beholden to China because China has the largest single audience, right? And so but so China puts all these restrictions on what you can and cannot put in your movies, and so they've even cut back now to only 35 Hollywood productions will air every year. Like, of all the movies created, China will only accept 35 Hollywood productions because China's entertainment industry has boomed so much. So they're fully invested over here in Hollywood, and now they just make their own movies over there. And this friend of mine goes, today, right now, China, and this was 6 years ago, they're going to make a movie that will make $1 billion in China alone. Right? They'll make a movie that will make $1 billion just with their own audience.
Right.
It takes Hollywood to depend upon China's audience to get our movies up to $1 billion. Right? So it's foreign investment, and California, Hollywood, it has superseded the rule of any single government, whether it's a national government or a state government.
Interesting.
It's the entertainment industry that is the oracle, right? The purveyor of truth. Every culture has its oracle. And when I say oracle, it's the truth teller. And so there's multiple well, I don't know what the term is, but essentially Hollywood is one of them, academia is one of them, and liberal institutions. So they're all in cahoots, but it's the voice of Hollywood, right? Why do you think Barack Obama came to Hollywood? One of my bosses, I don't know if I said this here on another channel, but one of my former bosses, oh no, it wasn't here, I was in private conversation. One of my former bosses, and in 2012 was his second term, right? I just remember one of my bosses saying, "Oh, the big dinner is tonight, $25,000 a plate." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, "Oh yeah, Obama's in town," and so where's the power and the influence? Hollywood is lining the pockets of the liberal politicians, and it's this incestuous relationship because Obama now has huge Hollywood Netflix deals, right? It's like you succeed over there in politics, you do the bidding of the elites in Hollywood, and they'll give you a job and give you book deals and give you Netflix series deals, etc. That's a kind of my first impression of what's going on. Let me just give a few anecdotal cases of just over the past few years. California is very red, except in like LA and San Francisco, right? If you look at the map, it's just like the county map of the United States. You look at just the county by county map of the United States, it's like, wow, it's a sea of red. It's a red nation, but all those concentrations of blue are in these metropolitan centers, and so that's enough for California to be a one-party state, right? It's pretty much a one-party state, but there are strong pockets of conservatism. So I live in a town that a lot of people would refer to some people refer to as Beverly Hills East. I happen to live in a town that is as elite, full of as many elites as Beverly Hills. It's like, this is the east side of town. It doesn't have the name recognition as Beverly Hills, but it's the same clientele or same, populace. And so I rub shoulders with some I'm a renter here, right? I'm in the lower class of this elite town.
Right.
And so we have this bubble of security and safety, right? It's like, it's a small town feel. My kids walk down the street, and then you see every now and then influxes of homeless people in these parks that, like, wait, we never have homeless people in our parks. And so now it becomes a more and more common. And just last night, I'm walking down the street doing my prayer exercise, and I do my prayer time at the same time. And every now and then I hear these sirens, and it's like, it's clearly a huge issue because there's gangland within earshot of sirens. Like we're in this little pocket, this little bubble of not conservative politically, but seems very traditional. Yet we're one city, one borderline away from gangland, and it's like we're living in a bubble, and as things deteriorate, more and more people are moving away from these safe place. Anyway, I could go on, but
Well, so
I don't know if I even answered your question.
well, yeah, no, I mean, basically, I was just asking for your perspective because you live there, you are there, and that viewpoint is a primary source. That's a source that is one that should be heard more. And so maybe I should rephrase what I said before. Maybe it's not California that's collapsing. It's the rot within California that's collapsing. It's the certain pockets where the corruption is at its height. During but actually before the French Revolution, before the first French Revolution, we think of that revolution taking over all of France, and it did it eventually. But the epicenter of it was not in the countryside; it was in Paris. The source of that revolution was in Paris, because, like you just mentioned, it was the elites running that nation into the ground. It was the elites, the upper class, literally partying off the backs of the peasants. Like you just mentioned, the international ties to these major cities in California are leaving everyone else in the dust. And so when you look at the data, when you look at how many people leave, hundreds of thousands of people leaving every year, when you look at the rate of homelessness, when you look at the rate of crime, how high they are, the question is, again, what led to that collapse? And to summarize, it seems like your answer is international and foreign interference, internal corruption, and what's the word? It's not a bubble. It's the bubble where nothing else outside the bubble matters. It's like
The word
you know what I mean.
escapes. Yeah, I do know what you mean.
You know what I mean? It's like there's a certain phrase for it. It exists in academia as well. You have that certain bubble that nothing outside of it matters. And so I guess my next question for you is the phrase, everything woke turns to shit, that phrase, does that apply to all of California or just the major city centers like LA, San Fran, San Diego, from your point of view?
Well, I kind of had this epiphany the other day when I was in Bible every morning. We are going through Exodus, and we just today we were in Exodus 20, but last week we were at the 10 plagues, and like Pharaoh, like it's always kind of perplexing to us. Like, how can Pharaoh see these incredible, miraculous things happen that were foreboding of his own doom? Right, these different plagues. It's like these are signs that things are not going the way you want them to, Pharaoh. Yet he hardens his heart. He buckles down. And it's like that's like a pattern you see with the elites in California and in the federal government. It's like there's all these signs and they ignore them. Right, there's these they take action, and if you look at the data, right, the statistical data, the effect of your action is harming the populace, is harming the nation. If they harden their hearts and double down, right, that's like
right.
And so Pharaoh and like, what is it? How can you harden your heart so much? And the fact of the matter is, and maybe this is self-evident, but the elites don't feel the effects. Right? They may see them and hear them, but it doesn't touch them in their everyday life. They have everything provided for them. It's because, this idea of having so much money that you couldn't possibly spend it the rest of your life isolates you. Like it takes away an important sensory, like you need to be able to sense when, I better be careful what I do and say, because it affects the bottom line in my life as directly. So they get to a point where that nothing they do or say, no matter how adversely it affects others, will never affect them, because they've got more money than they could possibly spend, even with a total economic collapse. And so the people making the decisions are not affected by their decisions, and so they keep doubling down. It's the hardening of the heart, and so it's a built-in vicious cycle that I think God put in. When Scripture says God gave them over, God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and in Romans 1 it says gave them over to the reprobate mind. That is the judgment that God has
Right.
brought. It is the judgment that God is bringing. It's not like the judgment's going to come. It's like, no, we are being judged currently. And this is Doug Wilson says this first time I heard this phrase, and I'm going to repeat it over and over again. God judges us by giving us tyrannical rulers. And so it's like it's an inevitability. We can't turn it around, nothing, no matter what we do. Well, yes, America's being judged, but the principle, and I love that I'm from the city of Phoenix. The Phoenix symbol is rising from the ashes, right?
Mm,
It's the secular version of the resurrection,
mm,
right? It's like you go all the way down and then you rise from the dead. Why is that God's pattern? So that no human can lay claim for fixing everything.
right.
Right? So
Right. Well, and going back to that same historical event, the French Revolution, there's aspects of it that some of our founding fathers fully supported. And there's some aspects of it that I support. But then there are other aspects of it that I personally don't support. Certain aspects are like the mob mentality, the mob ruling everything. Like the Reign of Terror was not the ideal solution to actually fixing the problem. And when you compare revolutions, when you compare the American Revolution to the French Revolution, the French were inspired by us. They looked at us and say, hey, we can do that too. But the difference is when we had our revolution, after the actual war, we actually created a system that represented the people. That, as flawed as it was, this system we created allowed for an actual functioning society to be developed. Whereas in France, it was mob rule. It was mob rule throughout the whole Reign of Terror, and there's multiple constitutions, multiple revolutions, and they also went through a mixture of republic, monarchy. And so when it comes to the microcosm of California, the fact is not all of California is LA. Not all of California is San Francisco. And yet the policies made in those cities affect everyone. And so in your view, how does California recover from this? Is it possible to recover from this? Or will the state collapse eventually? Like, what's going to happen in your opinion?
um I don't know if it was Steve Turley or somebody else that I was listening to that was talking about the new um, like job numbers,
Mm,
like the job report and unemployment dropping and stuff like that. And it's like, well, when you look at the numbers, where this is how politicians use statistics deceptively, right? To tout good job numbers, quote unquote, good job numbers. Whereas we're like, how could job numbers be good at all?
right.
We forget, we totally overlook, by design, the media or political design, that we have red states and blue states. And
Mm,
when you break the numbers down, all those job gains, the vast majority of the good news that's padding those good numbers are from red states that are enacting
right.
the right policies, right?
Right.
The red states that didn't lock down as long, and the red states that are ignoring federal mandates and this and that. And people, there are states, there are states where people never felt the lockdown at all, right? And their
Yeah.
economies recovered more quickly than the others. And that shows up in our national statistics. And so the President Biden is like, we've got great job numbers because of me. No, no,
Yeah.
no, no. And so California is one where those numbers are going in the wrong direction, obviously. And so there's this trope that is always repeated: as California goes, so the nation goes. And sadly, that's been true. But I don't know.
I'm sorry to put you on the
Turley,
spot like this.
no. It's good. I need to process this. But Steve Turley talks about the global a trend that's happening in our time is the Balkanization, right? You've got Viktor Orban in
Hungry.
Hungary,
Yeah.
but he's not alone. He's got the new prime minister of Italy. He's got Poland and even Georgia, the nation of Georgia, right? So in Europe, there are these lights that are going to lead the way out of the darkness, right?
Mhm.
It's these, and so California has its spots. That in Northern California, Shasta County is ultra conservative and right, and passing some really good legislation there that's spreading to some of the surrounding counties. So I'm not writing California off, and even though I think more and more every day about where I will go if I
Right.
have to, right?
Right.
Like if we are really at a precipice, an economic precipice, it will affect even me. Because I talk with my coworkers and like, you know, Disney's laying off tons of people, and these different networks are downsizing. And our department is fairly new where we're working, even though we
Yeah.
work on a legacy TV show, a show that's been around for 40 plus years.
Yeah.
Um, the crew that was brought in with us are fair. I mean, I feel like I have job security, but that doesn't mean anything. It's like they could eliminate people at the drop of a hat. So I always think, where am I going to go?
Just in
I don't,
case.
right. And so
Yeah.
I've got my top 3 states where I'll go, but I don't want to go. I don't want to go anywhere.
Of
I've
course, we don't want to
landed.
do any of this,
Well,
but
I've
yeah.
landed, and for me specifically,
Mhm.
because I'm a nomad. Like I was born to a couple nomads. I am nomadic. I moved more than 20 times in the first. I mean, before I was 18, I moved more than 20 times by the time I graduated from high school, and that continued until I found the woman of my dreams and landed in the town that I'm in now. So the town that I'm in now is where my children grew up. Small town in next to one of the biggest cities, but they've known nothing else. And I'm like, I'm from this town now. I believe in this town, and I even want to
Right.
run for political office at some point in this town. And it's like, I don't
Right.
want to ever leave this town. But this town happens to be in California.
Mhm.
So I'm riding it out. I believe God's called me here. I will stay here as long as it makes sense. But if the riots start marching down the street, and I've got like 3 places on the list. The family doesn't have a decision in this. It's like, you're coming with me wherever we end up.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, let's go back to the big picture and the truth. Always come back to the truth. At the end of the day, what can we pathetic we humans, what can we do to well, we know that humanity will collapse one day. We know that. We know that Christ will come return. We know that judgment will happen one day. And we know that all of our minuscule goals and aspirations, none of that matters at the end of the day. Long term when Christ returns. We know that. Until that time happens, what do you think the best solution is to prevent societal collapse?
Well, I am going to take issue um, with a perspective. So I'm a post millennialist.
Mhm.
Do you know what post millennialism is?
I've heard of it and not too knowledgeable.
Yeah, I can tell. Nothing personal. But when I became a Christian, and we'll just go in this direction. When I became a Christian, I went to a church, Assemblies of God Church.
Mhm.
I'm now a Presbyterian elder, so I've kind of spanned the gamut from ultra hyper charismatic to very 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 conservative, and now I'm kind of more in the middle. Um, but at that church, I was taught one eschatology: premillennialism, right? Pre-trib rapture, and judgment's coming, and premillennialism, that Christ uh, comes and reigns for 1,000, comes and judges and then reigns for 1,000 years. Postmillennialism is that Christ comes at the end of the millennium. He reigns for 1,000 years and then the end. And that's First
Gotcha.
Corinthians, First
Gotcha.
Corinthians 15 verses. 1 Corinthians 15 verses 22 through 26, I think, kind of cover the chronology.
Right, right.
And So it's like, well, what does that mean? Well, it means that Christ came. When he
Mhm.
came, it was the new creation, right? That the
Mhm.
old covenant passed away, that the last days happened. The last days were the last days of the old covenant. It was the destruction of Israel, was the final nail in the coffin of the old covenant.
Right.
That was
Right.
the end. That was
Yeah.
the end. And if you read scripture, they're always talking in the present tense when they're talking about these last days. And
Mhm.
we the end of the ages has come upon us, right? That's the end of the old covenant. And so Jesus creates this new, he is the beginning of the new covenant. And so the church is the new Israel, right? And so that being said, uh, we won't get into Revelation and all that, but if you step out of our little window of time,
Mhm.
we look, man, it looks like the civilization is collapsing.
Mm.
And they thought that in World War II, and they thought that in World
Good
War
point.
One, and
And
they
the cold
thought that,
era. Yeah.
right? And so when you step back and you look at how the world is changing, and
Mhm.
you live in your society, and when your society is on the verge of collapse, as we are, we tend to think that's the end of the world. And it's like,
Right.
no, it's not,
Right.
because
Right.
even those Israelites in Egypt, where their total economy was destroyed, while all of these plagues were happening, the Israelites were in the land of Goshen and protected somehow supernaturally. And so we are in the land of Goshen. Christians are not going to
Right.
die off
Right.
when the country collapses. And too much of Christendom is focused on, come on, Jesus, save us, come get us out of this. And it's like, no, we are the
You're
body of
already there.
Christ.
Right.
We
Right.
are Jesus, right? We are seated with him at the right hand of the throne of God right now,
Mhm.
ruling and reigning. And so you see Christians thriving. You see red states, and not that all Republicans are Christians, but you see the thriving. And so whatever is happening there's a collapse happening simultaneously with the rise of Christendom. And that's a
Right.
bigger group, right?
Mhm.
We're much we're much larger than the United States of America,
Mhm.
and so we I'm a Christian first and an American second,
Right.
right? And so when America sins and kills 60 million of its most innocent citizens for the last 50 years, judgment is what we're under.
Mhm.
And so as far as what can we do? We can love God. We can do we can support the parallel polis, right?
Right.
We can band together. We can do what we're doing right here, right now. We can vote the right way. We're doing what we need to do, and the left is collapsing in on itself. There, I just kind
So
of
yeah.
introduced you slightly to post millennialism.
So the answer
Things are
is
getting better, even though they feel like they're getting worse. That's
so
the
the
point.
answer is keep who's really in charge in charge. God's in charge, not us. Keep that always at the forefront. And after you have that foundation, focus on the local level. Focus on the
Yes,
local level,
exactly. And that's your
local leaders,
family. That's
local
cleaning your room.
policies, your family.
That's
Right.
making your bed. It's
Right.
paying your bills. It's loving your children. It's loving your wife. It's getting like hanging out with your friends, being a positive influence. It's voting in your local,
Mhm.
the right people in. It's living life the way, you can't solve the world's problems if you can't solve
Well,
the
of
little
course, you can't
things
solve the
around you.
world's problems. I guess the point I'm getting to now is just sitting and waiting and hoping. It's obviously very important, but I'm a firm believer that God gives us the strengths and the talents and the skills to do something, to act, to go out and be that influence, to go out in from your room and get out there.
As we're running out of time, I want to pick up on that. God has created each one of us for a very specific thing. And so we're
Right.
talking generalities, doing the generalities things, but you, individual, everybody listening to this, you and I
Mhm.
included, have a very specific thing, task that you're called to. And I
Mhm.
believe I've found it. Like this project I'm working on, it's like, if it's really going in the direction I think it's going in, it's going to have a huge impact. And you
Right.
as well. I'm sure you have these dreams and desires. And as you follow them and pursue them, you are going to have a significant impact, right? And that's the facts. God has
Right.
each one of us a great plan for us. All right, last 5 seconds, 3 years.
Never surrender, never submit, patriots. Society is what it is. Never forget who's in charge and keep moving forward.
Carrie, yes, this conversation will be continued at some point.
Yeah. Have a great
Bye,
day,
everybody.